All right. Well, sir, will you tell me specifically as we begin this adventure together how to say your name correctly so that I never get it wrong?
We could try. Mar, as in like march, like marching, and echo.
Mareko.
Mar echo. Not a
Mareko.
ma. A lot of people want to make it M-U-H, but it's M-A-R.
Mareko.
Echo.
Mareko.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Wonderful.
Oh yeah,
I'm going to do my best.
M-U-H-R. A lot of people want to make it M-U-H-R, but it's M-A-R.
Yeah.
Mar
Sure.
echo.
If I've ever mispronounced it, I apologize.
Don't worry. Everybody does it. Very few people get it
You
right.
certainly have.
My wife's name is Malin.
Okay.
And during, elementary school, she was regularly announced as Melon.
Oh my
So
God.
that's my nickname for her. And her last name was Apple.
that's rough.
So Melon Apple.
Oh,
Her
wow.
grandma's name is Mary, and her maiden name was Christmas. So she was born Merry Christmas.
Oh my God.
It's a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Some people's parents. I don't know what they're thinking. Although Malin is a very nice name. I have a friend named Samuel,
Yeah.
and his last name is Michaelon. And first time I told that to my wife, she's like, "You're joking, right?" And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "He goes by Sam, right?" And I was like, "Yes." And she said, "You realize his name's Sam Michaelon, right?" And I'm like, "Yes." And she's like, "You're still not hearing it, are you? His name is semicolon." And I was like, "Oh my God."
Well, now you can't ever unsee it. So now every time you talk
Exactly.
with him, he's semicolon. Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually, the next time I saw him, I brought that up, and he's like, "You mother, I thought you would never find out. Don't tell anybody." And I don't know if we're supposed to be clean language, apologize, or you can just
As
bleep
much
me.
as possible, but
Yes.
he's got the bleeping power.
bleeps,
He's got a
the
full
bleep power.
repertoire
Okay.
of sampled sounds. So
Okay.
we'll just make it. We'll you be you, and we'll just
You can
make it
throw
work.
in farm animal sounds like an oink or
Beautiful.
a moo or
Love that.
We should go. We'll record some. We'll go get some freshies. I got big
Some
ones right now.
freshies?
They're
Are
making
you-
some great noises.
is that you guys have those animals nearby?
Yeah, I have a farm. We
Oh,
have
excellent.
dairy cows, pigs, beef cows, chickens. We got the full
Wow.
full pack.
Man of many,
So-
many disciplines.
Many hats. Many
Yeah,
hats.
many hats.
So Mareko, Mareko,
Mar, echo.
Mareko.
Everybody has to take a drink every time that you screw it up. How's that sound? Everybody's
That's
gonna
gonna
be
be a fun podcast.
wasted by the time we're done. No, I'm just joking. You'll get it.
Fifth cup of coffee today. We'll be fine. I would love to hear your introductory. Tell me the journey that you've been on for the last however many years that have sat you in this seat across from us today. How did you land here doing what you do, surrounded by the people that you are surrounded with? Just give us a real detailed explanation for why
We don't want
why
to get too
this?
detailed because it'll take
We've
5
got it.
hours.
We've got it. We've got the time.
It's hard. I don't know. From time to time, I reflect on like what were the interstitial, little tiny nuanced steps along the way that led to me being here and talking with you. Or just wherever place I'm at. Sometimes, I do that. I sit and reflect. I'm like, where did this happen? Where did this start? And I feel like I joked that I got into knife making through salsa dancing because I was working with somebody, but before salsa dancing with somebody and teaching lessons with them, and they worked for a knife maker. But it was actually before that. What got me interested in salsa dancing in the first place was that I was picking my mom up from a local community lesson that she was doing with some coworkers, and I think they had gone to happy hour or something like that beforehand. So she's like, "I don't want to drive afterwards," and she'd gotten a ride down to the lesson and everything. And so I got there a little bit early, and I was watching them do the dancing, and I was seeing a lot of the guys struggle, and I was like, "What the?" Oh, sorry. what the oink are they doing? What the oink are they doing? And so I was like, I could do that. This is ridiculous. And then I think it was probably a year or two later, I was trying to go to community college, which I was not good at, mostly because I didn't have strong study skills and discipline to do the busy work.
Sure.
I excelled at tests and showing up, but I was terrible at doing the busy work. So I had a tendency to not do well in school, and not only in college, but also high school too. But anyways, but I was trying to go to school. I needed a PE credit, and this was, like I said, about a couple of years later. And I had, I remember, or what was it? I was looking. I had already done like weight training. I had already done yoga, and I saw that salsa dancing was part of one of the credits. It's a single credit class, and so I was like, let's check it out. And so I actually did like a very fast cost benefit analysis between that and the lessons that my mom had been taking, because that gal that was teaching those lessons was still offering those, and it was much more fiscally responsible for me to take the class, the lessons at the college, because it was something like 20 some odd plus lessons for, and I think at the time one credit was like $72 or $75, and the community class was $80 and 4 lessons. So I was like, nah. Also, I was like, I had like Pell Grant and stuff like that was helping to pay for community college and schooling at the time. So also it wasn't coming out of my physical pocket, and I could still use those credits toward a degree, which I still have never accomplished. I still don't have an AA. I think that was actually one of the last times I tried to go back to community college. It wasn't because of salsa dancing class, but it was just because of struggling with other classes. But anyways, that was my introduction to salsa dancing. And the gal that was teaching the class ended up asking me to be her assistant dance instructor at the end of the class. And so then for the summer after that, I spent, 2.5 months learning everything most of what she had learned over the last like 5 or 10 years. I say that I have like this physical intelligence in a way. Like I'm a very kinesthetic learner. I learn from hands-on much better than just being spoken at, though I do learn very well as well from being spoken at, because like I said, when I would take classes and in community college, and the ones I would struggle, and even actually in high school too, the ones I would struggle with the most had a lot of busy work versus the classes that were lecture, note-taking, and tests. I got A's every single time because there wasn't any BS busy work in the middle. Right. It was always so hard because it's like, I just showed you on the test. I know this stuff. Why do I have to do all the crap in between? So, So I started teaching with her, and she had a job working for a local business that was like an outfitter company, kind of like REI, but much smaller and more very hyper local small business. And they ended up, REI opened up, and sadly, this company went out of business. A small business went out of business. Probably a year or two after, and they were on their way to like retiring anyways, but it is unfortunate that they weren't able to be in a position to like sell the business and move on and have like nice retirement and all that stuff. But anyways, she, my salsa dancing partner, was working for them, but they were closing down. She needed another job, and they introduced her to a friend who had a knife making business. His name was Bob Kramer, and she started working for him, doing his administrative work. And it was shortly after she started working for him I knew that she had gotten a new job, but I didn't know what it was or who it was or anything. And I actually had zero knowledge about working with metal, anything about all I knew about knives is that I like using them, especially for cooking in kitchens, and they're handy to have out in the woods. But otherwise, I basically never had a knife. I didn't collect knives. I didn't do anything with knives outside of those kind of two things. And so she started working for him. I was working at a restaurant. I was 24 and I had no direction in my life at that point. I was struggling at doing school. I hated doing school. And so that wasn't the direction for me at that point. I had some friends going to one of the bigger schools, like universities in Washington. It's called what the hell is it called? Western Washington University. Often referred to as Western for short here. It's up in Bellingham, Washington, which is about half an hour short of the Canadian border. So if you go straight north of Seattle, you just keep going. Just before you get to Canada, you drive through Bellingham. And it's a beautiful town. It's on a gorgeous bay, woods everywhere. The mountains aren't far away. And there's a school there. And I was young, single, lots of pretty girls. I had friends that were going to school there or had been going to school for years there. And so I was like, I'm just going to relocate and try that out. And at that time, like I said, I was kind of going through this quarter life crisis situation. And I was telling my friend about this, my friend Chris, that I was doing the salsa dancing with. And she's like, you should meet this guy I just started working for. He's very interesting. He's had lots of different businesses and he's traveled all over the world. And he was a clown at one point for Ringling, Barnum and Bailey. And now he's a knife maker or a bladesmith is what she said. I was like, what the oink does that mean? And she said, well, like blacksmiths, like in the movies or like reenactment villages and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, yeah. She's like, it's like that, but he focuses on knives. I'm like, what? People still do that? Like, where are we at in this world if people are still like hitting metal to make things? So yeah, it was bizarre, but she's like, yeah, I think you guys would get along really great. And, if you guys got along well, maybe there could be like, you guys could have a conversation and there might be some sort of imparting of wisdom and life experience or something that could come from it. And so I was like, all right, cool. And so, we set it up. I got connected with him. We met up actually at the restaurant that I was working at the time. And, on one of my days off, we got some beers, we got some food. We were kind of sitting there BSing. His wife actually was there too. And what I thought was going to be just like kind of a jam sesh or like a BS session over some food and beers, kind of ended up being a little bit of like an hour and a half interview. Mostly with him. His wife like jumped in every once in a while with some questions. She was a great lady. She's really nice. And, but at the end of it, he was like, I can't promise anything, but if you're interested, I would like to offer you a chance to try to, he didn't say it like that. It was like, it was more like he needs some help in the shop. He can't promise full-time work. And at the restaurant, I wasn't even working full-time anyways. So he was just like, no promises, but I need some help in the shop, and maybe something more can come of it down the road. And I think essentially it was a litmus test, because what he had me do is just clean. And I just cleaned and cleaned and cleaned in his shop for probably at least the first couple weeks I was there. And then he started showing me other processes. And as he had more and more things for me to do, he had more need for me, had more work for me. So at that time, then like pretty shortly, I think, yeah, like I said, after the first couple of weeks, I ended up putting 2 weeks in at my previous job at the restaurant. And then I started working for him full time, and it started, yeah, like part time. But then I was working solid full time with him, and I was, day in, day out working with him, unless he was traveling for like Blade Show or some other events or his own personal travel. I was with him day in, day out, like 6 to 8 hours a day, depending on the work day and what needed to be done and stuff like that, and what each of us had going on in our lives. And so I worked for him for 3 years. And the last year I was there, I was making most of the Damascus and a lot of the mosaic stuff that was being auctioned off at the time. And before that, let's see. I'll back up, actually. From the beginning probably makes more sense. So I was cleaning, and then he showed me the process for making mosaic pins. So then I started, his process for making mosaic. So I started making his mosaic pins and his handles, for his handles. And then I started profiling blades like stock removal style, to then he would grind and heat treat. I started breaking down handle blocks, like billets of wood, to be stabilized, or that had already been stabilized, or maybe it was like cocobolo, doesn't need to be stabilized. And so just breaking down billets of wood, and all the time still kind of following behind him, keeping the shop clean. And I guess I did a good job because he kept me on and I kept doing it. He just kept showing me more and more processes. So after the profiling was getting all the holes lined up and drilled, and then he had templates and stuff. And he had systematized everything, so it was pretty straightforward for somebody who had experience working in, I guess, not necessarily a metal shop, but working with tools, and at least in a wood shop, which I had the most experience in. I had been working in a wood shop since I was like 13 years old, 12, 11 or 12. Yeah, I think it was like 11, middle school shop. I started doing woodworking, but even before that, I had experience with drilling holes and hammering nails and stuff like that. I was always kind of building stuff from scrap material that we had at the house. My stepdad at the time, his father's company had a woodworking shop, and they had all kinds of scraps that they were sending home to, like, that people would use as firewood. And sometimes we'd use it as firewood, but often I would pull stuff aside and I would build stuff out of it. And so working for Bob, doing all of that stuff was pretty straightforward for me. Because, like I said, since the age of 11, I had been doing woodworking and working with tools like drill presses and sanders and bandsaws and stuff like that. So I had a pretty decent familiarity at that point, at the age of 24, with those tools. Even though I didn't do that work the whole time, I also did like interior, like finished carpentry at one point. I was a roofer. I did roofing work at one point. People are like, how do I increase my hammer accuracy? I'm like, get a roofing job, or get a bunch of 16 penny nails, slam them into a piece of wood, and then flip it over and slam them back out. If you're hitting accurately, they'll just go straight in and straight back out. But if you're not, then they're going to get bent over, and you have to figure that out. But that is unfortunate. Like, honestly, I really attribute a lot of my hammer accuracy to that, especially a roofing job, because you're hitting with a head that's like maybe the size of a 50-cent piece, like inch and a quarter diameter. And you're like, and it was 3-tab with nails. So instead of staples. So it's like you set the nail and then slam it, set, slam, set, slam. And you're just trying to work as quickly and efficiently as possible to cover the roof of a house. And you get pretty good at it pretty quick. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Not guaranteed. Hopefully. Otherwise, you're hitting your hand. You're going really slow. You're dragging everything out, and everybody starts getting pissed at you. So, anyway, so I started doing the handle, and then after profiling blades and drilling holes, then I started doing the handle assembly, and then shortly after he started showing me how to shape the handles, and then I started doing handles like full time after six months of being there. I think 6 or 8 months, something like that. And then I did all the handle sculpting, except for the Japanese handles, because he didn't really do a lot of like wah style handles very often. So which are kind of like, for people who aren't familiar, or blacksmiths who aren't familiar, it's kind of like it's a octagonal cross section. Take a square bar and knock in the corners. Now you have an octagon. It's the same thing shape wise, but it's all in wood, and you got to sculpt it and get things lined up just right. So I think he left that. He did those because they were far and few between, and I did all the fully contoured stuff. And so I was doing the handle sculpting, blade prep, I started doing all the primary grinding before heat treat, on Damascus and carbon steel. And then, like I said, by the time I was done there, I was also doing the Damascus. So I was making the steel, stock removing blades, drilling holes, primary grinding. He would heat treat, and then I'd get it back and assemble a handle, sculpt a handle, and then give it back to him to do the finish grinding and etching if it needed etching, or marking, and the sharpening. So it was kind of a 60-40 split kind of like in regards to the work, but he was definitely doing kind of the more nuanced aspects, especially with the finish grinding and the heat treatment, because that was really kind of like his bread and butter he had been working on for years. And I love the handle sculpting. You know, a lot of people know me for the Damascus, and I am very good at the Damascus, but I'd say probably the next thing that I'm really great at is controlling belts for heavily or like complicated contouring and sculpting of handles. I feel very confident that I could replicate almost any handle that's out there, unless it's like involves a lot of like heavy engraving and sculpt and carving and stuff like that. That's a whole nother. But when it comes to the contouring and shaping, I can do almost anything. And I can do like 95% of it. I can get done on the machine, and that's really tricky because sometimes machines remove material a little bit quickly and things get messed up pretty fast. And so then, and I get into detail about how things ended between me and Bob, but essentially he fired me, which doesn't feel great to always bring up, but that was part of the journey. And like I said, I go more into detail that actually on my podcast, The Artisans of Steel, I was supposed to have a conversation with Greg Sims and excuse me, and something happened last second. He couldn't show up or he couldn't make it. So I ended up telling kind of my story, and so I get into detail about that there. And I spent like I think 2 hours, 3 hours talking about not just that, but just like the whole path. But anyways, if people want to know more in depth about that, you can go check that out. But otherwise, so Bob fired me, and then I kind of was like, okay. So I went back into working in restaurants, because to me, up to that point, even though I was good at the work that I was doing for Bob, it wasn't a passionate pursuit. It wasn't something I sought out, like where versus a lot of people these days, I feel like, are like they're pursuing knife making in like a visceral way and in a like a passionate and like hungry way. They're trying to consume as many resources and information as they can find online through videos, through blogs, through old forum posts, through social media. I've been looking for it all over the place. But for me, it was just a job. I had up to that point in my life, at the age of 24, I think I had at least or close to 24 different jobs at that point. Everything from, I think my very first job was working at McDonald's. Actually, I think it was my very first job, flipping burgers, working at McDonald's, and and then I went into construction from there because my experience through middle school and high school of woodworking, and I was good at that. And then the car I was driving blew up, and not completely, just it threw a piston through the engine case, and
that's
it doesn't drive very well after that. That's a catastrophic. Oops. And so I stopped doing that job because it was heavily reliant on your own personal transportation. And I can't remember what I did at the time. I think I went back into restaurants. And so I did a lot of restaurant work off and on between various jobs. I worked at a gas station at one point, like cleaning the bathroom and stocking the sodas and all that shit. It was gross. Although I did hold that job for like a year and a half, but I had a tendency to move around quite a bit. I worked in a warehouse, night stocking. I worked at like Safeway, which up here in the Northwest is essentially like, I think it's Cars out on the East Coast. And so anyways, just working in a grocery store, night stocking, and being a helper of what they called the helper boys. I help people find shit. Or sorry, pigs. Pigs, oinks, find stuff. I'm going to try to keep doing this self-editing because I think it's silly.
Make it a lot easier to find them.
Yeah, because you just cut out the bad word and then jump straight to me doing moving forward or doing the self-editing. Anyways, I did childcare for the YMCA before and after school program at elementary schools for a little while. I was in AmeriCorps, one of the AmeriCorps programs called the NCCC program. I just like, I had worked so many different jobs. I would have to, I think at one point I had written, like done a tally or actually wrote all the different jobs down. But I worked at a movie theater, like tearing tickets and sweeping floors. Actually, when people ask me what I do, the only consistent thing throughout all the various jobs that I've had is cleaning. And so I don't say I'm a master of the custodial arts, but I joke that I'm a professional floor sweeper, because it's necessary, and it is, like I said, one of the most consistent things I've had to do throughout all the various types of jobs that I've had. And so, yeah, so how did I get, so I tried to pursue restaurants, and I moved to Denver, and because Denver, Colorado had a cool kind of up and coming restaurant scene, and people were doing some really cool stuff with food out there. But I couldn't get into any decent restaurants because in Denver, Colorado, they have what is it? Not the CIA, but they have like a culinary arts program, some sort of like 2-year like expedited or speedy program. So like I think they do 1 and 2 year option. Anyways, the nicer restaurants wanted you to have that degree before you started working there. I'm like, but I've worked in restaurants for like 7 years at this point in my life.
Right.
I have a lot of experience working in a restaurant, and they still wouldn't even let me stage, which is essentially going and working at a restaurant for free and kind of auditioning in a way. And if you can prove yourself useful, then they're like, okay, we would like to start paying you, and we want you to keep coming back. And so I couldn't even get that. And, but while I was working at kind of a crappy sports bar that was had way overextended itself. It had a kitchen that wasn't much bigger than kind of a conventional home kitchen. I mean, it had like the commercial restaurant stuff in it, but footage wise, the kitchen itself was probably 400 square feet, maybe 250. And they had like 80 items on them. It was like, we want everybody to have all the options in the world. It was terrible. So I was working that job, getting along great with all my coworkers and having fun in Colorado. But all the time I was like, I kept drawing pictures of different Damascus pattern ideas because I had caught it's often referred to as a sickness, or a bug or whatever you want to call it. But my brain was seeing things in the world, or images would pop into my head and be like, oh, and I would draw them down and kind of reverse engineer them, break them down, try to figure out how they would be made. And at that time I had an okay grasp, but it was definitely in its infancy. But not on top of that, because of my experience of working in restaurants and my experience working for Bob, making culinary knives, I had my own take on what I would do differently if I were to design my own knives. And some of this also was informed just by seeing other knives out there in the world. Japanese knives, European knives, different commercially manufactured stuff versus handmade stuff. And so that's when it dawned on me, or it finally hit me, that though I had many jobs at that point in my life, and I'd kind of been a jack of all trades in a way, knife making might have been the one thing that I actually could be great at. And when I worked for Bob, we got a letter back from one of the clients, and I was always in the shadows. Very few people knew I actually was there working. And so, which is kind of how that works when, you're somebody who's built up a business like Bob. You're the face of the brand, and then people have employees, right?
Right.
So, but he shared this letter that came back to him from a client who is a surgeon that worked and taught at Stanford University. And he had been a surgeon for years at this point, and he splurged on this knife because when he goes home, the way he unwinds and relaxes is by cooking, and having great tools to help support that endeavor is why he bought one of Bob's knives. And the letter was about the handle, and how it felt like such a natural extension of his own hand. And that's when also, at the same time, it kind of dawned on me that the handle is not an afterthought. And because the the relationship with the working end, with the tool end of the thing, is always through the handle, no matter if it's a knife or if it's a chisel or a hammer or whatever it is. You have to have that relationship, that you only have that relationship through the handle. You don't hold on to a hammerhead by the hand and start slamming down on stuff. You need that kind of leverage point that helps create some of that excess or extra force, right? And while you don't necessarily always need that in a knife, it is part of, you don't just have a blade. You have a blade and a handle. And that's when I realized, like, oh, what I was doing was actually really good. And that letter, when I was drawing out these designs and stuff like that, would bounce back into my head. And I was like, that was my work. And the reason Bob shared with me was because I did the handle on his work, on his knife. And he thought, that'd be a nice thing to share, honestly, because the letter is mostly about the handle and how it was a natural extension. So that's when I was realizing this is a thing that I wasn't just good at, like so many other things, but it was something that I could be really great at. And I think I need to start pursuing it meaningfully. And so I started looking around actually in Denver, because my idea was like, I'll stay in Denver. I just need to find somewhere to work. I don't have any tools and equipment, but there's got to be somebody here doing bladesmithing. And nowadays I feel like it would be a lot easier to find somebody, but I couldn't find any information on makers anywhere. I didn't know about the knife annual. I didn't know that the American Bladesmith Society has kind of a roster with people's phone numbers and addresses. I didn't know any of that. And so I couldn't find anybody, but I knew of a maker back in Washington, in Seattle. I had met Dave Lish while I was working for Bob Kramer, and I knew that he had his own blacksmith shop where he was still a working blacksmith, that doubled as his knife making studio as well. But then right next door, he had a school where he would teach classes, but it wasn't always occupied. It was occupied maybe a couple weekends a month. But otherwise it sat empty, and he had set up for like 6 or 8 students at least, and all the different forges and anvils and grinders and blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, I'm going to start talking to him and see if maybe we can come up with an arrangement. And we were able to. And so I started, I actually moved back to Washington before I even had started talking to Dave. I just knew that I needed to go back to where I was familiar, and I knew that there was potential over there. And if not with him, then maybe somebody else, because I knew of a few different makers in Washington. And so, we ended up being able to strike an arrangement. It was about this time, 2013, that I started working out of the school out of Dave Lish's school, and because I already had a bunch of skills, it was a matter of just having equipment and materials to work with. So he helped supply materials, and he helped supply equipment, and I went and I did my work. And then I was able to, we had an arrangement as well with Daniel O'Malley, who owns Blade Gallery, also known as or I guess he also has another arm of it called Epicurean Edge, which is more culinary focused. And I would sell all my work that I was making to him to help kind of get started, and to guarantee that there was there was money coming in, because I had no money to pay Dave. So he helped to kind of secure a way for both of us to get paid, so that he wasn't at a loss for letting me work in his shop, and then I was also able to get by. But even when I moved back, before I could even start doing that, I moved back to Washington in 2012. And like I said, it was about this time, 2013, that I actually got started at Dave's shop. So I was working odd jobs. I was actually couch surfing. I didn't have a solid house or a place to live for a while. It was probably May of 2012 is when I think April or May when I got back. And it wasn't until February of 2013 that I had a house. Otherwise, I was just kind of like on the go all the time, trying not to overstress my friends and try not to ruin those friendships by overstaying my welcome. So I kind of would bounce around. And finally I had a friend who had a house. He used to rent it out to friends. But he had a more serious job, and everybody else was still like partying, and he was kind of over it. Basically, he's kind of a little bit more introverted and likes his quiet time, which is completely fair. And so he kind of kicked everybody out essentially a few years prior, and I reached out to him, and he knew what I had going on, and he knew what I was doing, and that I had skill and that I was serious about it, but I needed a place to live, and so he set me up, and he let me move in and stay at his place, and I lived there for, at least a year and a half before I was able to strike out and get into my own place, and I was paying rent and stuff like that, but it felt weird to be pseudo homeless. It wasn't homeless, but I didn't have a solid place, right? And I had a storage unit that somehow I still pay. That's honestly that was the biggest thing. I had to keep paying for my storage unit and I had to keep paying for my cell phone. But that's really with the odd jobs I was doing here and there, that's what I could afford. And some of the odd jobs when I moved back, I was working with a friend that had, he had a business where he was cleaning foreclosed houses. So this is 2012. And so this is kind of the fallout from 2008 and the housing crisis and stuff like that. And so people were finally getting kind of evicted or kicked out of the houses by banks and whoever, and the bank was foreclosing on people. And so people were leaving, but often there was a mess, or not often, but the places that we were working in, messes were left behind. Some were gnarlier than others. I worked that job for, I think, a few months before I was like, I can't do this. And I honestly went back into working for a restaurant, and I found a job at a little bakery. And so, everything seems to happen around the springtime. So I got that bakery job in 2013, about this time in 2013, maybe in March or so, at a new bakery that was just opening up or had just opened, and I was washing dishes and prep cooking there, and that was 11 years ago. I was washing dishes and prep cooking at a little bakery. And then it was a few months later that I was able to connect with Dave and strike up a deal with him for me to start working out of his school. And I did a little bit of back and forth, and it quickly, after the first few knives and first batch of knives that I made and sold, I was outpacing the bakery job monetarily pretty easily. And so I was like, okay, I think we're done with that one. And I just started making knives, but I was only making knives 3 days a week. I was still living at my buddy's place, and I would drive up to Seattle, and I was heavily reliant on friends. And so, I had friends that lived up there. I did have an uncle that lived up there. And so every once in a while I would stay with the uncle, but, most of the time I was staying with friends. Because I was only there for, 3 days a week or so. And I would go work in the shop, and I would work long ass days. I would start at, I think Dave got to the shop at around 10, and I'd be there sometimes until 11:30 at night. Because I only had 3 days to do the job or get it done, because then sometimes Dave would have a class or whatever, timing wise. That was just the agreement that I would just be there for 3 days a week. And so I did that for, like I said, about a year and a half. And then I was able to raise some money through a crowdfunding. Indiegogo was one of the crowdfunding platforms. And I was able to raise some money and get money together on top of the money I'd been saving to get a shop, get some tools, get a shop put together, and start working out of my own shop. And then I started doing, and that was, what was that? That was fall of 2014. And And so I've been solo since then. I mean, really, when I was working out at Dave's shop, I was solo then too. It was just working at his shop and then paying him a cut as compensation. But so now at that point in fall of 2014, I was on my own, in my own space, my own tools and equipment, everything. And here we are. And I just kept going, kept doing it. Okay, I've been talking for a very long time. God, it's probably
wonderful.
been like at least almost 40 minutes I was talking all by myself.
Well, we were talking a little bit before that.
That's true.
No, I love it because I love when people are willing to go to the granular level of like, this is exactly what happened.
Sure.
Because I feel like it's a lot more understandable to see the arc of what it takes for somebody to basically start with no idea of what they're going to do, where they're going to go. And, it sounds like when you were going through that period of jumping from job to job, what was compelling you to move forward? Did you feel dissatisfied? Did you like, what was it that moved you so often?
Excuse me. Yeah. I think I would get bored with jobs.
Yeah.
I would figure them out. I would work them for a while and be like, I'm bored. And I would just get another job.
So the interest was what brought you into the next one.
Yeah,
though,
I wasn't
right?
like super engaged with things. Like I think
Sure.
so. I worked at McDonald's, and then I went to construction, and then from there I went and I got a job. Oh, actually, sorry. I went from McDonald's to the movie theater, and then from the movie theater I went to construction, and then from construction I went and I worked at Lowe's Home Improvement Warehouse as a not sales associate, but just like one of the floor people in the lumber department. And so, because that's what I knew, and so working at Lowe's, and then I went from there to working in a warehouse job. Yeah. Where I was stocking shelves and doing like grocery delivery, and it was a small business, like a small grocery distributor. Essentially, I would deliver to either small mom and pop shops or gas stations. Some of the basics like candy bars and Gatorade and cigarettes and whatever, like cleaning supply, whatever they needed. And then from there, I went to work at a grocery store doing night stocking. And then I did that for not very long because it was a night stocking job. I would start at like 7 o'clock at night and I'd be off at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And then I'd have to get up at 7 o'clock to go to school. And that probably was a contributing factor as to why I was struggling with school as well.
Yeah, it didn't help at all.
Yeah, there's nothing better than working a whole night and then getting 3 hours of sleep and then starting your day off at 7 o'clock with formal logic. And so, and then from there, it was just like one thing after that. I was just like, no, over and over and over and over and over again.
Would you consider it
go ahead.
a taste test? Were you taste testing all of these different things? Was there something inside that was saying, I'm going to find the thing? Or was it just kind of wandering?
I wish it was as thoughtful as that. No, I think I was just bored. I don't think I ever really had kind of like the concept of or the idea of like finding a passionate pursuit or trying to discover the thing, my thing that I'm good at or great at, that I can really push myself to continue to do even though there are struggles along the way. And I think that should be the goal of most everybody, honestly. Or if not everybody, is to try to find that thing for themselves. Whether they make it their full-time job or not is a different question, but people should find that for themselves. But that was not my mindset as I was rattling through all these different jobs. I'm just realizing there's like a bunch of jobs I already skipped over. Working in various restaurants and bakeries. But anyways, it was just like trying one thing after the next. And I thought, honestly, I was just going to end up being kind of like a dude that works in restaurants, and that was going to be my life. I enjoyed cooking. I didn't like the pressure of a really busy restaurant. And nowadays there are structures like there's a business model called, oh gosh, what is it called? I think it's called a meal prep business. But essentially, what they do is like, if they're based around, like you might try to organize yourself in the structure of your business and the food that you're making based around people's like eating habits of, say somebody's trying to be keto or low carb or something like that. And then you create a menu, and then you send that, you have a place where people go, like a web app or a website, and they pre-order. So you have all your pre-orders set. And so there's very little waste. You know what you're supposed to make. You have a deadline by which you make it, but it's not just like smashed into like 2 hours of just absolute mayhem, like what would happen in a restaurant. And actually, one of the first times I saw that structure was when I first met Neil Kamimura, and I was teaching with him in Hawaii, and his girlfriend at the time was working at a meal prep place, and I was like, oh my God, if I knew that this existed and was a thing, I would probably still be working in restaurants.
Sure.
Because you don't have to deal with any customers. You just sit there, you hang out, cook. It would be just like whether or not you honestly essentially got along with your coworkers. But I liked working in restaurants. I liked especially doing the prep work and stuff. That was a lot less pressure. And I guess if for whatever reason knife making doesn't work out for me, I could always kind of fall back on that, although it is restaurants, I don't know, it still sounds really stressful to me. Anyways, it's not ideal. I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to fall back. But I do have moments sometimes where I'm like, God, I'm so burned out. I feel so stressed out from time to time and overwhelmed by the work and the demand and stuff like that. And it's all like a blessing, but also a curse at the same time in a way.
Right.
And I've in the last few years discovered that, discovered that I've probably honestly struggled with depression and anxiety most of my life. I just didn't realize that that's what was actually going on. And it's just has been compounding until it got to a crazy point a few years back where I needed to do some work to figure out what the bleep was going on. So that I didn't completely check out. And I don't know where I was going with that, but anyway, so I get burned out and I get frustrated and stressed out and full of anxiety and all that stuff. And so every once in a while I'm like, you know what? I'm talking to my wife. I'm like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. It's too much. The fluctuation of income also is very stressful. And now we're a two-person income, but for a long time, for like 7 years, essentially, it was just a single income, and so there was that added stress on top of it. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm ready to get a job working at Costco. I'll stock shelves at night. I'll work in a commissary, or I'll sell, or concessions or whatever.
It just needs to not all rely on me.
It's a lot, and I think that's one of the things I really underestimated in starting this pursuit in knife making is really the whole business aspect. I am really good at the work. Business is a whole nother part that I never learned and never attempted to learn, and
then we're forced to learn.
And then we're forced to learn, and sometimes you're okay at it. I struggle. I struggle more and more, it seems like, as of late. But I thankfully have the support of my wife to help with the business and administrative side of things, so that I can focus more on just the making and the teaching and the Patreon and like knife, being people's knife coaches, or I guess I'm only one coach, but knife coach.
So when you were working with Bob, and you said that it didn't really enthrall you at the moment. It didn't capture your attention, but then later on, after the fact, you began noticing patterns, and you were thinking and breaking the world around you down through the contextual lens of this trade you had just learned.
Right.
And so is that kind of was it a passion, or was it kind of like you simply noticed that it was interesting it was an expansive interest too, right? Whereas some of this sounds like you get into a position, you understand it, you comprehend it, and you're ready to move on because you want to challenge.
Yeah.
You want to challenge intellectually, you want to challenge creatively, and so, is that accurate? Is that kind of where you saw an open-ended question that you were going to walk down the road towards the answer to, kind of that never-ending pursuit?
Yeah.
Was it that formal, or was it just kind of, I'm just curious what your mindset was as you were walking through these decisions.
Yeah. So with my job with Bob, so I think until I worked for Bob, the longest I'd ever held a job was actually working at that gas station.
Okay.
One part of it was the owner. My friend that I was talking about earlier that gave me a place to stay when I moved back to Washington, that helped me basically not be homeless. His dad owned that gas station. It wasn't just like a dirty little gas station. It was actually like it was a store because it's outside of the main kind of metropolitan area, the main Olympia city center area by like 20 miles. And so it's the closest thing to a grocery store by about 20 miles. And so people would go there to do their grocery shopping. We had produce, we had all the things you would find in a grocery store, just on a much more scaled down version in maybe like a 2,000 or 3,000 square. Yeah, it was probably like 2,000, 2,500 square foot building. And so it's not a lot of space to make that happen because then you have to fit coolers and freezers and all kinds of back storage and all that kind of stuff in there as well. So the actual grocery shopping portion was maybe 1,500 square feet. But it was, so the only gross part really was there were the gross people that would come to the grocery store and make a mess in the bathroom. Or when I was running the register, especially in the summertime, people would come in, they'd be getting their food, and they pull this sopping $20 bill out of their sweaty back pocket. And it was, that's good stuff. Is one of the most disgusting human interactions that I've ever had. It's like somebody, just imagine like somebody, oh God, just spit in their hand and like, and shaking your hand, and the complete stranger. You have no idea who they are, where they come from, what they've been doing earlier that day, whatever.
What it's moist with.
What is this moistness I am feeling? That was gross. But outside of that, my buddy's dad, who owned the store, was a great guy. He's actually somebody I still keep in contact with and talk to, who was kind of a mentor to me in a way. There was nothing very formal there, but he and I would sit down and we'd have talks from time to time. And it was good to have that, because growing up, I didn't actually have a very good father figure growing up. And so like going through high school, I think it was the middle of my the summer before my sophomore year, my parents split up, and he wasn't my biological father, but my mom had married him when I was 5, and they had been married, I guess, if I was 12 no, not 12, it's like 14 at the time. So they'd been married for like 10 years or something like that. And so,
in very formative years too.
Yeah, and so, and for all effects and purposes, he was, or intents and purposes, he was my father, up to that point. But he ended up cheating on my mom, which is gnarly. And so I have a habit of just writing people off, which is why I'm known also for just like straight blocking people for stupid shit, because I'm just like, I don't need, sorry, bad language. I don't need this crap in my life. And so I'm happy to just cut ties just like that. So he was gone. So then it was teachers, but actually like mostly coaches who also were teachers at the high school. But then when I worked for Bob, even though I had coaches that I had spent 4 years like doing track and field was my bread and butter when I was in high school. and then my track coach, who worked with me directly, was also my English teacher my sophomore year. That was the only time he actually taught me, but I would see him in school all the time. And I would go seek him out and hang out with him and stuff like that. Because he had kind of like this fatherly quality to him. And he was essentially at the right age to be my dad, essentially. And so I always looked up to him kind of like, I guess like a fatherly or older uncle kind of figure. But when I worked for Bob, it was a while ago that I did the math, and I was like, holy crap! Like I worked for Bob day in and day out for, like I said, 6 to 8 hours a day for 3 years. I spent more time with him than I ever did, like multiples of what I ever did with any of my coaches or any of my friends' dads or any of that stuff. So he was the closest thing in my life at that point. That was kind of like a father mentor kind of figure. And so when I was fired, that was a hard hit for me. So and it's honestly still something I struggle with every once in a while today. I don't know why I got down that track. So when I worked for Bob, to get back to the question you were asking about, what kind of drove me to continue to pursue the knife thing is that the work I was doing for Bob was so different from what I had done up to that point. I had done a lot, like I said, I was very familiar with woodworking. I had kind of an artistic quality to the way I saw the world and was able to draw things very easily. Like I could sit in front of a room and I could draw, not photorealistic, but I could do a pretty good sketch of what I'm seeing in front of me. And so I had that ability to look at things in that way. And the work was just so novel. It was so different. It was, there's all this new material essentially that I'm working with, metal. It's very different from wood for sure. And it throws a lot more sparks. And so, and it moves differently and you form it differently. It's somewhat similar when it comes to the grinding, but also very different. And so for me, it was just like, it was this work that was very interesting. And there's always it felt like there was always something new. And so at that 3-year mark, the mosaic Damascus was now the new thing. And so that's kind of like what still kept me engaged. And then after parting ways with Bob and trying to pursue other stuff, it was still kind of like this pursuit of these like seeing, like you were saying, these images out in the world or these images that pop into my head and trying to figure out how to reverse engineer them and how they could be transformed into a pattern made out of steel. And it's almost like this problem solving, I don't know what to call it, but it's creative problem solving. It's puzzling, but not just like sitting in front of a literal puzzle, putting things together, but so like it's just completely abstract all in my head. And I think that was probably one of the first times. Actually, I just remembered a different time. But one of the first times that I had a consistent puzzle to kind of figure out. When I was in middle school, in 8th grade, we had this kind of, it was a woodworking class, but it was kind of almost job training in a way. Because that particular shop class would get jobs and we would build stuff, and it was teaching us not only more woodworking skills, but also kind of like how to manage a business and money and stuff like that at the same time. I was not very good at that part. I was just really kind of focused on the building part. But like one day my mom, she showed me this picture from like Better Homes and Gardens or something like that of a couch table, which is, if people aren't familiar, it's literally kind of a narrow table that is near or like right behind a couch, that maybe has shelves or has cupboards, but you just kind of put your tchotchkes and other kind of accoutrements and candles, flowers, whatever in there. We would store magazines and stuff in there. But I looked at it, and then from just literally the picture, from a few different angles, I started drawing out plans and figuring out what all the joints were and how things were, and measuring like all the different measurements. And like, this is in 8th grade. I was essentially reverse engineering how you would build this thing, even though I never at that point built anything like that. I was doing it or drawing out these concepts and these plans based on my experience up to that point in my life. And I was actually pretty good. And then the shop teacher was pretty surprised when he saw it. He was like, the only thing I would change is like between some of these pieces that would be the top, we're going to throw in some biscuits and we're going to do some biscuit joints there. But otherwise, you did it. I was like, cool. All right. So, and I was 12 when I did that, which is kind of crazy to think about now. Yeah. 12 sounds really young. You have kids too,
It is
right?
really young. Oh, yeah.
And
I've got 5 kids.
Yeah. My son, I have one kid, he's almost 8. But I guess I could see him kind of doing that. He has a similar mind where he can puzzle things out. He is, he's a Lego freak.
Yep.
And if you ever saw the Lego movie, you know, when like Emmett all of a sudden starts seeing like, or even I guess Wild Sides at the very beginning, right? She's seeing all the different parts around her in the alley and she starts like pulling them together and building a motorcycle. He can do that. He has like an encyclopedic knowledge of every single piece he's ever touched that he owns. And he knows what they look like. He knows what color they are and how many he has in various colors and where to find them. It's like, it's crazy. But that's kind of how my brain works now when it comes to thinking about Damascus patterns and material and how it moves and being able to not only predict where things are going to go, but looking at a finished product and doing the reverse engineering and working backwards. But it's all, again, it all comes back to this creative problem solving and this kind of puzzling work, because it's like these small little challenges that I really like. I get this kick of what is it? Is it endorphins that are like the happy?
Yeah, like dopamine.
Yeah, I totally get a dopamine hit when I'm like, I did it. Look at that. Figured it out. I actually got one right now. It's a collaboration project with my friend Gabe Fletcher, who is Anchorage Forge on Instagram. And he's doing some great work. He actually has one of your guys' machines. It's awesome. I've used it. It's a great machine. When I went up and worked and taught with him, but he the steel that I'm working with him to make is essentially trying to construct a kind of a devil's skull out of pattern manipulation, which is what I the type of patterns I make, where I'm stacking up plates and then I'm forging them and then I forge them on like the bias or I do all these different forging processes to them. I refer to those as pattern manipulated mosaic Damascus patterns, versus like a canister, like powdered canister Damascus, where people are either working with like EDM or a laser cut or water jetted parts, and then filling in with powder and then welding in a can. That's similar but definitely different versus what I'm doing. So the pattern manipulated and like being able to plan everything out, and I'm doing this thing because it's a devil's skull. I'm working in factors of 6 because 666 is the mark of the devil, and so anyways, we got this cool project. I have it all like drawn out and planned out, but now the next step is to test it and see if it actually works. I'm pretty confident it's going to work, but I'm sure there's always something that is difficult to predict or unforeseen that occurs and affects the way the material moves and the lines within the material move. And that's where, like, as a blacksmith, I'm sure you look at parts, you know what you want to create, you know how to manipulate the material to move, to create those forms, but that's all exterior. What I'm seeing is what's happening on the inside and how things are getting kneaded and mushed and pushed around. Right. And that's how I look at steel, and the various forging processes and what those will do to affect the pattern, as well as, again, looking at finished stuff and being able to kind of see it and rewind as to what steps it went through to get to that point.
Well, and I think what you're describing is a perfect way to introduce the class that you've got coming up with us, where you're going to be teaching basically the exact skill that you just outlined. Because when you're forging, if I'm forging a mechanical part, I have a shape to make the material flow into. That's fine. That's very understandable. But I went and took a class with Will Stelter, and we did mosaic. And it was my first foray. I am not a bladesmith. I don't play that game. It was my first foray into sitting down and saying, here is the pattern I want to make. How are we going to do it? And then breaking it down step by step. And I really enjoyed the process, but it did not at all correspond with my basic knowledge. I've been doing this a long time, but I've never done that. Sure. And I was really surprised at the methods necessary. They were practical enough for me to understand, even, without having any prior knowledge. But it sounds like I'm very fascinated with the process that you're articulating, especially with the class structure that we're introducing with you. Yeah. Where, essentially it sounds like you're planning on a lot of sit down theory classwork around the idea of this process, and then how to go about it. 'Cause the practical work is almost the easy part in comparison to, the theory of design that you have to encapsulate within this conversation.
Yeah, so the classes that I'm going to be teaching with you guys, and I believe, like looking around, like there's a calendar right there. I mean, technically there is, but it's not on the right month. I think it's in July. It's
so July 22nd and 23rd for decoding mosaic. Yep. And then 24th and 26th for Damascus and irregular billet assembly.
Yeah, so 24th to the 26th, is the like you just said, Damascus and irregular billet assembly. And the first part is a 2-day class. It's decoding mosaic Damascus, but it's also discussing the principles of material movement, not what it's moving like on the outside, but how the movement you're doing on the outside is affecting what's happening on the inside. And so it's about understanding the material flow and how that flow is affecting the pattern that's within that material, which is kind of the very abstract thing that has taken me a long time to work out. And it's really, it's where I'm at now and I'm still learning stuff because I keep seeing, which is great. And then it kind of feeds back into that creative problem solving. Right. And that's what I love about this pursuit is there's always a new challenge. There's always something new to work out and figure out. People are always coming at this work in regards to Damascus making and pattern making and blade forging and stuff like that from very different backgrounds. People, for some reason, I feel like that is something that isn't really taken into consideration often, is that we all come at this work from very different backgrounds. I come at it from working in restaurants and doing woodworking, right? Right. Who would have thought that I would be this person that is like almost a Damascus savant in a way? And I think somebody called me Nostradamus one time because I could predict what was going to happen. And so so the principles is about understanding like how the tools you're using, the heat you're working at, how engaged are those tools, whether it's a hand hammer, a press, or a pneumatic hammer, or a mechanical hammer, a power hammer of some sort. How all these different things work, how hard you're hitting, how soft you're hitting. All of these play a role in how the material within, how the individual lines and individual parts are affected and distorted based on those hits. And it really does play a major role. And which is why a lot of people, they're drawing things out and they think they have, even when I first started, I would draw out these I still have designs. I think they're viable, but I haven't actually gone back and reworked them. But when I was first drawing them, I was like, oh yeah, if I do this, then this is going to happen. And the lines are going to look like, I was way off. I was not right. And I still think that they would be great patterns and very cool patterns to create, but it would take some reworking, I think, to manage those. So, but anyways, that's what That's what the 2-day class is about. So it's an understanding. We actually start with kind of like the theory about how the material is actually moving and what forging process and how the forging process affect how that material is moving and the material, especially in the lines within. And then we take those principles and then we start walking through a bunch of patterns. We go through my work. I have the students pull up patterns from other people's work, whether it's my work or their own work. Like there are some people who are like, they've reached out to me and said, I made this pattern. I don't remember what I did. Can you look at this and help me understand how I made this? And so I look at it, and I've done this for friends who are either newer or even people who are mastersmiths. Mm-hmm. And I worked, and they're like, "Yes, you're right. I remember doing this now." And I just didn't. They didn't take notes. People ask me if I keep any notes. The only notes I make are when I draw out the initial forging progression, just because I used to work from memory or try to work from memory, and I'd miss steps. And so I would have to kind of like check it off. All right, did that part. Check. And I would just check off all the forging progressions or the processes. Anyways, so we work through patterns to really just like to ingrain these principles that, because it's not enough for me to just throw theory at you and be like, all right, good luck, see ya. Like I feel like a strong sense of responsibility to you to help you to really like for those principles to be ingrained so that they are not, it's going to take time for it to become second nature, but to just have a very strong foundation by which you are working, stepping off from. So that's why then I'm like, bring in patterns I've never even seen before from makers I don't even know, and let's look at them. Bring in patterns from people who are making crazy complicated stuff. Like I did this class in Arizona, and somebody brought in one of Salem's patterns, and we kept like looking at and zooming in and getting closer and closer and closer to get down to like some of the base elements. And I'm like, holy smokes, this pattern went through, it looks like at least 6 welding processes, if not more, to create this pattern before it was even then tiled out and forged into a blade.
Oh my God.
And so Salem's good at that game, but he's very good at hiding stuff. And so that's where like some of my approaches also, so that kind of gets into the reverse engineering, is trying to like identifying some of the telltale parts of a pattern that help you to identify the various forging processes. And so the first day, again, we go through theory, we go through my stuff. And then the second day is like going through other people's stuff and just, again, getting in reps and also getting the students involved to help like come up and point out, oh, this line here, or that over there. And like trying to help to identify even just where like when a pattern is mosaic, tiled out, just understanding where those weld boundaries are for those various tiles it helps you to break down a pattern in a big way. But even being able to identify those is really tricky, especially when it's makers like myself or Salem or Will or who are very good at disguising them or hiding them, or whether we're doing it necessarily on purpose or not, but because I think our overall goal is that instead of it just looking like a pattern that's just like check, repeats down a blade, we want it to look like an overall composition where things all just kind of flow together as they make their way down the length of the blade. And when people are doing that, that makes it challenging to understand what's going on. So that's the first part of that week. The 22nd and 23rd is the principles of material movement, as well as the decoding mosaic Damascus. And then 24th to the 26th, then the next 3 days are basically my approach and introducing people to how I approach using mathematics more than anything to conserve material. I hate spending all this time making these mosaic Damascus patterns and then wasting material, either by adding too much that then goes into a blade and then grinding it away and turning into the dust. Sometimes that's necessary, but other times it is kind of wasteful. And so helping to reduce waste, helping to enhance productivity and efficiency, and then showing people some new processes that I've kind of, I guess, pioneered would be the best term for ways that I'm putting material back together to create unique and interesting patterns, not to just be different. It's still doing something meaningful and creating a pattern that's meaningful and interesting without it just completely getting lost. Where it's like there are some patterns out there that to me are essentially like Jackson Pollock's, where it's just like, we're just going to slap this steel through all these various processes and we're going to do something and it's going to be crazy and wild. And some people are into that. I like the controlled chaos in a way. So it's like, I don't know if Picasso is the right way to describe this, but it's like, it looks chaotic, but it is very, very intentional in how things are done in the order of operations, and then using, like I said, unique and unusual billet assemblies to bring these patterns and these materials back together to create new forms that have a sense of familiarity because they have base elements like W's or something like that, or that are the base element, but then the way everything actually ends up coming together is unusual. So there's this familiarity but unusual look to it that creates this sense of curiosity. I'm trying to invoke this sense of curiosity and interest in a potential customer so that they see it, they like it, they can kind of like relate to it in a way, but at the same time, they're just like, what's going on there? It's like kind of crazy looking. And so it just has that kind of appeal. And so through these unusual billet assemblies, I can create those kind of movements and stuff like that. There are different ways that I use material and mosaic approaches to kind of, I think I call it cheating sandmai. And it's not making fake sandmai. It's working to get that aesthetic, but incorporating it into mosaic so that you can also have a beautiful mosaic pattern as well as the sandmai aesthetic. And then I have another one that's, I think I call it the faux feather, but essentially it's creating a feathering effect without actually hot cutting the material. And it's all about the forging progression and how you bring the material back together. And so in that 3-day class, we'll go through the math because the math can be really intensive. And when I taught this class last September, it was a lot. And actually when I just taught it I didn't, get super deep. I just kind of touched lightly on it as a demo at the Travis Wertzhammer down in Arizona in March. I even along the way kind of lost track of where my numbers were coming from, and doing that in front of like a group of 50 or 60 people was nerve-wracking.
Of course.
That is not my preference. So we have all kinds of notes written up and stuff now so that everything goes as smoothly as possible to help get the principles and the concepts across, to get the equations across to people, so that these are things. And in these various classes, I actually provide kind of like worksheets to work from, or note sheets, so that you're not chasing down drawing things. You can focus more on keeping track of what I'm actually saying. And you can focus there and then make little notes here and there wherever you like. So I have worksheets, kind of not necessarily workbooks, but
Sure.
But anyways, for people to carry along. But anyways, so we go through the math, and then I use some of that math, and then I do some practical demonstration, and I'll show like how by using this math, and we work through it together, forging one element down to like 3 different sizes. But by using the math, we're not just randomly forging them down to 3 different sizes. We're cutting off specific amounts and forging down to various sizes, and then reassembling them all back together in a meaningful way so that there is no waste. And then we go through the math part, and then we go through demonstrating or talking about different another unique pattern or a billet approach or welding approach, and then I demonstrate it, and then we do another one, and then I demonstrate it. And a lot of the goal is for people who are taking this class to have at least a solid foundation in getting steel welded together, because that's kind of the prerequisite. You don't even necessarily have to have done mosaics necessarily, but if you can make twist pattern, if you can make random pattern, ladder pattern, whatever, if you can get steel to weld together, then you're ready to take this class, either of these classes. Because that is actually probably especially when it comes to the unique billet assembly class, that is one of the harder things. It's just like, you can learn all that, but do you even know how to get steel to stick to each other? If you don't, that's a whole nother class on its own. But two, it kind of is, it's going to slow everything down to the person who essentially is like not the slowest, but just like with the least or the smallest.
They have to play catch up the whole.
Yeah, play catch up.
Yeah, right.
The smallest base of knowledge that they're working from. So, so I hope that people who are signing up for this, I honestly, like, it's going to be a long week. It's going to be a lot of work, but basically what I'm trying to do is just like unload my brain as best as I can to you as to how I understand how material works, and moves, and how to use unique, build assembly techniques that essentially nobody else is using, and to make your work stand apart, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges right now in the knife making community is how do you make your work look like your own work rather than look just like a carbon copy of somebody else's? Because if it looks essentially the same, then it comes down to, what's this person's reputation versus yours, or what's the price point versus yours, and all that kind of stuff. And
it begins to commoditize the product.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think you have that as the generalization of bladesmithing, and even in my realm in tool making, it's like as more and more people get introduced, there can readily become a commoditization of whatever.
You did it. I think you got it.
Final of the final product, and I think it's easy to go down that rabbit hole because now you either go and separate on brand, which is an avenue, or you separate on price. And that is a spiral you never want to get yourself into.
Right. As a race to the bottom.
Absolutely. And it always ends in the same place. So we have, 200 years of historical data to see how that works. And so I think it's, I think that's a very noble pursuit to go in and say, okay, so how do I actually learn these methods to create a process that's going to give me such an identifiable product that it becomes a component of the brand and the aspect that people are looking for. So I am thrilled to finally have you out here and to get some seat time in front of you. And I think it's going to be a wonderful time. So where else can people find out about your work, your knives, everything that you're doing? Instagram, website, what do you prefer? What avenues?
Yeah, Instagram's probably the best place to find me and to see my most recent work as well as past work. You can find me at Maumasi Fire Arts. Maumasi is spelled Maumasi. But I also have a website, maumasifirearts.com. And those are probably the two best places. In my Instagram bio, I also have a link to a link tree that just got a stack of all the different stuff I got going on through the Patreon. So Patreon's another great place to find me, where essentially I'm there to be your knife coach. So there are life coaches. So I'm here to be your knife coach. Essentially, I do a podcast called The Artisans of Steel, where I interview other knife makers and kind of get their story and their history and their inspirations and where they're going and all that kind of stuff. And then I do a private Q&A where essentially that is your chance to literally ask me any question about any part of the process, either that you're struggling with, and for me to coach you and help you work through those things. So the Patreon's a great place for that, because otherwise it's hard. Some of the things are the processes. People will give you, a quick couple sentence or maybe even a paragraph answer, but this is a chance for me to sit down and talk with you directly, or through the Q&A for I've done 3 hours on my Q&A.
Wow.
Answering like 1 or 2 questions. So we can go deep on those things. Because
gives a space for that.
Right.
That's wonderful.
Gives space for that. And that's, I feel, again, I feel like this sense of responsibility to people, especially when there's money being exchanged. Like it could even be like $5 and I'm like, I owe you my life. And so, but also you can find me on part of the Knife Talk podcast as well. And I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, I don't know. I really appreciate you guys bringing me on to have this conversation and to get my story out to people who maybe have not heard of me or know about my work. And I think this class that I'm going to be teaching with you at your guys' school in July is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to meeting all the new people because I ultimately end up making friends at every class, and then
of course.
Once we become friends, then you can ask me anything basically. And honestly, when I have classes, I always say the class doesn't end here. I'm a resource to you now. And actually at my last class, I did a private lesson for 4 guys down in California recently. And I was like, they referred to it as the 24-hour phone service. I can't remember what you call it, like when you call in and need help or whatever.
Yeah,
for stuff.
your helpline.
Yeah, the helpline, 24-hour Mareko Maumasi helpline. But yeah, the class doesn't end when the class ends. At that point, I'm there to continue to help you through whatever you got going on. And again, because this class isn't a traditional take either of these classes, they're all theory. They're kind of lecture. And I think a lot of people will be like, oh, but I want something out of it. I want a class out of it. And it's essentially, or I want steel out of it, or I want to make a blade out of it. And that's like, I'm sorry, but that's just not what's going to happen because like I said, I'm trying to unload my brain and how I think about steel and material manipulation for you to essentially create like a Damascus enlightenment. So it's like, I could teach you how to make a blade, sure. But what I'm trying to teach through these 2 classes is something that has taken me, I've been making knives for almost, for a cumulative of 14 years, but have been thinking about steel and pattern manipulation for nearly 20 years of my life. And so it's kind of also getting kind of, not necessarily a shortcut, but just like getting that depth of experience in just a few days. And again, it's going to be a lot, but I think there's going to be continuous value for people who take the class. And again, I will always continue to be a resource for you if you ever take one of my classes.
I love that. That's so wonderful. Well, sir, I just can't thank you enough for sharing your time with us and your story. Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure and a joy to sit down with you today. So looking forward to your class coming up. And otherwise, we will be seeing you soon.
Sounds good. I look forward to it.
All right.
Cheers.
Au revoir.